Okay. Hi and welcome to the kubeadm office hours. Today it's the 9th of May, and let's see what we have on the agenda. First, we have, as discussed, the latest hour on Slack. Some CI, I don't know if we should call them problems, but inconsistencies regarding pushing the images from when the CI builds from master and from release branches. They're pushing images differently to GCR/Kubernetes CI images. And we should, as a consequence, our release branch jobs, EDU jobs, don't work. And we should try to find a way, together with SIG testing, to make this work again and see a better path forward.
So there were two main redirectors or URL modifiers. There's CI and CI cross. And the CI cross was meant to build all the artifacts. It was my understanding from looking at it, the CI cross was meant to build all artifacts. Even though they're untested, it was to build them all. And that was what was used in the upgrade tests. So the regular tests all work because they're using the CI URL. Now the CI cross URL stopped working a long time ago because somebody in test infra stopped publishing the artifacts. So when the upgrade job, which depended upon the cross artifacts, even though again they're untested, get pushed into that location, they were out of date. So they were never updated. So as a result, all of the upgrade tests have been failing in the 110 plus. It was actually failing before then. It was failing way before then because I think the last update to the CI cross products, last time I looked, was in like a 1.9-ish build of some kind, right? And someone stopped doing it then. So the question that I have, and that I've been posting on Slack that I don't understand, is like I do understand we should absolutely be publishing cross-build products as part of the release, but as far as the testing artifacts that we're publishing for the actual test suite for test grid and test infra, we don't have anything that's actually consuming the cross-build products. Right? There's no test inside of the entire test infrastructure that I've seen that actually consumes the cross-build products other than AMD 64 to actually test them and give you results in test grid.
Tim, actually one comment. So to my understanding, the normal fast build job for which is running for master, it's not pushing images to registry. That's why we are using CI, we were previously using CI cross for everything.
Yeah.
That must have been a long time ago because when I jumped in, CI was working fine and CI cross was broken.
It's because, well, for master is because it's like it's in background changes to CI cross, and it uses the latest image from cross build for master.
I don't think I followed that.
Can you say it again, Alexander?
So if you're trying to use CI for the latest for master build, it was always using the images published from cross build. But if you try to upgrade from, let's say, latest 1.10 to latest master, it will not work because latest 1.10 points to CI cross and it points to some beta version of 1.10.
Yeah.
Not the stable build.
Yeah, the CI cross location is broken.
So to clarify, like CI cross is running at head. And it's always only running at head, not for the release branches. Hence, we have CI cross images always at head, running like on an every hour interval or something like that. But when we cut a new release branch and go to 112, no more 111 image builds will be uploaded. And as the CI should be very fast, used for merge builds, no images are at all published. So also for our AMD 64 builds, we have to use CI crosses. I mean, that's the only one that is pushing images. So the kind of easy solution here would be to convince SIG testing to run CI cross also for the release branches. Then we could also always use that. The other thing that technically we could try to ask for is to make the normal CI job used for the merge bot and stuff like that start pushing images. That would like make or delay the normal procedure and make it take like 5 minutes longer or something like that. So, or 10. That's why it doesn't do it at this moment.
But when we will end up with AMD 64 images will be pushed twice. One from fast build, one from cross build.
And the question of the size of the images will go up dramatically that the test and frog guys have to save.
Sorry, the size of?
If you push images all the time, right? I mean, part of the reason why images are not getting pushed is because of both the time and the space that it takes in the GCS storage.
Yeah, exactly. So we're using CI cross because it runs periodically, every hour or similar. So it's always like it could be one commit or two commits behind if you recently pushed, but that is better from the SIG testing perspective, as we don't push for every commit. Instead, we push every 3 commits or something, and we can still use them. So that is the problem. And if we find, I also thought first, as Tim, that it's more related to the architectures and stuff, but as Alexander pointed out, it's actually the only CI cross is the only job that is pushing images. Funny thing, except for release branches, where we do both CI. It's called CI, but it pushes images as well. So, and that we're doing different things for master, where we develop, and the release branches is the thing that is causing issues. So either we go all with CI cross, that runs periodically on both master and all release branches and pushes this latest TXC file to both locations, and we can use images there, or we do some even weirder hacks.
I think there should only be one. Like, the fact that we have 2 separate CI locations is bananas. Like, yeah. no one understands it. It doesn't make any sense at all. The idea that we aren't publishing all the artifacts that we need because there's some type of overload, there isn't garbage collection, also seems fundamentally broken to me, because there's no reason we can't garbage collect these things after the fact. And it seems like a broken piece of the infrastructure, right? I do think that the artifact should be published until the PR is merged. And then once the PR is merged, it can be garbage collected, right? Because that way you still have the artifacts that any person can reproduce the issues that they're seeing in CI at any point in time, right? Because the problem we have here is we have like a weird disconnect. Like, a person has an issue on a bug, right? Whatever it may be. In order for them to actually reproduce that thing, they need to rebuild everything in their local environment, repush to their own local registry, and try to pull down artifacts that are basically part of their PR, right? This seems like a broken thing of testing more so, and we're trying to hack around it. But it's kind of like we want to pick our battles. One thing, I think we should only depend upon one location, right? And just make that the canonical location. Can we agree or disagree on that bit?
Tim, one thing here is, if you're referring to particular image from build, like from pull request, you can specify the explicit version. The problem lies only when we have like this automatically updated labels, like latest something, which has nothing to do with pull requests.
So I I think so. Just to answer your first question, I think we all agree that one place would be beneficial. The problem is that, or CI cross, to avoid confusion, we could actually call it CI periodic, because CI runs for everything, like all the PRs, all the pre-builds, pre-submits. There's a lot of churn there. Like it runs nearly every time something happens. But CI periodic or CI cross is this periodic job that just checks out master every now and then, builds and pushes images. And for us to easily consume this in kubeadm, we want to use the pre-built images, and then currently the only solution is to use these images that only have commits from the periodic CI cross job. So
that's kind of bananas, though, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no reason, there's no good reason I can see. We have the cloud, and as long as we garbage collect, it should be reasonable. There are currently 900 open PRs, and hey, it's a forcing function. There's no reason why we can't keep the images for every single thing and not have it be periodic, but have it be every pull request, and then when the pull request is merged, then it's garbage collected. Why is that approach not rational? Other than it takes a little longer, but the space isn't infinite. It's bounded.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's just a feature that doesn't exist at all currently, and there's probably a lot of weird infrastructure limits, or like in the way it's coded right now. I would expect from just briefly looking at the code, but yeah, that's the ideal case. Like build for all pull requests, garbage collect when merged, and build for every master commit.
I mean, that's the way we do all our CI downstream. I mean,
So did anybody bring up the issue about if you just rely on like the latest tags from CI, you're not necessarily guaranteed to get something that's consistent anyway?
it should be by SHA. Yeah.
How do you mean? If you do a curl on CI?
So if you're looking at the tag for like CI latest, when you install the binaries, you're getting whatever the latest binaries are at that time. But then when you go to pull the images later, there may have been an update in the time between when you install the binaries and when you try to pull the images that are tagged with CI latest. So the only way that you can get a consistent deployment from kind of the CI builds anyway is to reference a specific SHA, like Tim said. So I think that's part of the reason why we started moving away from the using the CI builds anyway for the automation is because we were hitting issues where we were getting inconsistency between the artifacts during testing.
Yeah, Chuck had a good point. There's lots of old context flying around, and a lot of like this what's ideal versus what infrastructure we actually have in testing for right now. I think, or I'll try to talk to Jeff Crafton, EXDI, and Ben the Elder on Slack, on either at SIG Lifecycle Slack or SIG Testing Slack, and from there try to get some kind of conclusion with them, how to proceed, and hopefully then be able to write up a short document on the history and what we want to do. Because yeah, it's really confusing.
Lucas, but what do we want them to do is the question, right? What would we like them to do for us? Right?
Exactly what you send the PR. So we use for now.
We had a few choices that we are talking about, right? We need to prioritize which ones we would like and which ones we don't like. For example, the question from Tim was, do we need ARM images? Is that a yes or no? If it's yes, then that is one data point that we need to go to them with saying, if you give us a build, then it should have ARM images, right? So that's the first question. Do we need ARM images?
I think it's totally irrelevant for CI because they're not being tested.
Okay, so we don't care about ARM images. So let's take that off the table. Then the second question is,
I think though they're like I mean, why wouldn't we publish all builds?
it's not a release, right? It is from the tip of the branch. So why would we want to do that unless we are testing it?
Yeah, we're publishing things that go untested, right? And if it's not even we, it's like the testing apparatus. I think we should take we out of the equation and talk about they. The testing infrastructure, or they, are publishing artifacts that are untested, and they're not part of a release. Like, people should not be depending upon these bits. They're only for CI.
But if people do just the same, like run on whatever architecture you have and run this kubeadm init with CI latest, then
yeah, no one should be doing that though. Like
that's what we're doing in our retweet and end-to-end test.
Well, yes, we are. we are doing that as part of the end-to-end tests internally. It's not an external consumable thing that we are publishing, saying like, "Hey Joe Schmo, user, use the latest CI builds as part of your ARM deployment." And it's not something anyone is doing. And even
no,
then,
but I mean, the packet guys want to do for example, want to run exactly the same end-to-end tests as we do on AMD 64.
There's no reason they can't do that right now. If they are here and they're actually doing it, sure. But like, unless they are actually doing it, or they could, federated testing can also be, as I mentioned, they can publish their own build results at whatever granularity they care about, and it doesn't have to be consuming the cross-built CI artifacts. Right? They could build from tip of master nightly and still publish to test grid using federated testing.
Yeah.
Right. So let's take that out of the equation first. Then the next question is, we want the latest 1.1, 1.9, 1.10, all of them to have SHAs, and the SHA should point to a directory, and the directory should have all the things that we need, which is at this point AMD 64. And that's what we are going to ask them, right? And we don't really care about how many jobs they run, as long as they give us the contract, which is the latest 1.x will always be valid, and it will point to a directory which has all the artifacts.
Yes, I think that's fair.
So that is already the case, right? But the problem
no, it
is
not the case. It's not the case, because even if you pick the SHA from the old ones, right, we have to prepend CI cross directory or CI directory depending on whether it is old or new, so which is wrong. The other way to do it is, if they publish the latest files, the file itself should have the full path prefix that we can then go use, and not just the SHA. That's another way to do it.
Yeah, I think the most important part for us, at least, is not the binaries but the images. So we can use, so we like execute a curl of VJet somewhere,
right?
And in this case, to CI latest 110, for example, and then we get back a SHA, and we can then, the contract is, we can then use this SHA version and SHA to reference an image from GCR Kubernetes CI images. And
that sounds, that sounds okay
I
to
think
me.
that's mostly the contract, and it shouldn't, right now there's a difference if we do CI latest 110 or if we do just CI latest because CI latest works, CI latest 110 doesn't, as the CI cross, the periodic CI job doesn't run on the release branches. So
Right.
the easiest solution would just be to do what you did, although it's, as Jeff said, a bit redundant, but it's just being consistent.
Right. So then the question is, okay, so let's assume that we can get rid of the CI cross from the code, right, in 1.9, 110, and latest master. So then what we'll have to go do is we'll have to go to test infra and make sure that all the configs are fixed to point to the correct buckets right now, unless we get a contract in place for them to set up the jobs. So that's the third option.
So if we did break the CI cross redirect, CI to CI cross redirect inside of kubeadm, we wouldn't be able to do again on the master branch, because by CI there's no images pushed. Instead, it's CI cross that is doing. So yeah, then we would have to make the merge bot CI things push images, as Tim said, would be the ideal solution, but
Yeah,
doesn't exist.
why don't we, because we're kind of like, we're dovetailing around, or we're not dovetailing, we're just spiraling around test infra, when we should really be talking with them about some of this, because it's clear that a bunch of stuff has changed and been broken for a while now, and we need to go and fix it with them in a consistent way that makes sense. And I think I'm not very happy with how we are referencing artifacts from GCS buckets for different build scenarios. It kind of, it's very unsettling, to be honest.
Right. That's why I started off with the premise that, okay, let's do cross builds everywhere, right? So, and then that got shot down. And it got shot down for Lucas also earlier when he tried that in 1.9, I think, or 1.10.
Yeah, I'll try to talk to them again. When is the meeting, by the way? Because I think it's like at midnight or something for me. Last time I checked.
Can we just, who are the people we need to talk to? Because like, it's not all of test infra. It's primarily like 2 people.
Yeah, it's like Jeff
and Jeff and Ben.
Jeff and Ben. Yeah.
Yeah.
So can we just like try to get them on the horn, maybe even today, if possible, or otherwise we can try to set up something for early tomorrow. So it's not like midnight your time, Lucas.
Yeah.
I can take an action to follow up with them to try and get a meeting set up. That seems really at a reasonable hour.
Yeah, and I'll try to, if nothing else, just chat on Slack and see if we can get a conclusion from there. I guess not, but otherwise we'll do the meeting.
Right.
Okay.
I also would like to be in that meeting.
Yeah, we'll send out to the mailing list.
Chuck, I'm sorry. We don't have anything written down in any of the PRs. It's just bits and pieces floating around. So we don't have a single place where you can read about this. The latest attempt I have is my PR, where I'm listing out, the GSUtil commands for going and looking through the artifacts. Other than that, we don't really have anything. Sorry about that.
Yep. Yeah, I think I just am unfamiliar with the whole CI process, so I need to go through the test info repo anyway.
Yeah, hit me up on Slack and I'll walk you through it.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it's also, it points to fundamental flaws that like this stuff shouldn't be so hard, right? Like this is just CI, and a lot of other people have their own CI and CD, testing pipelines. I think the reason it's so hard is we kind of over-engineered a solution to solve a set of problems, and now we're living with like the legacy of some of that stuff. So we had serious scale problems, so we built an encabulator, and now we have other serious problems along the way.
Okay. The next topic is creating a new GA tracking issue from.
Oh, that was me.
Yeah.
So the last GA tracking issue has a bunch of stuff in there, and I think we should probably just create a new issue, and I'll probably just do it. But I want to include some other pieces that that we haven't had on there, like config, to make sure, and also whether or not we want to include phases, the phases update as part of the. It's not even an update. It's kind of restructuring phases to be underneath a NIT as part of the contract for GA. I think that would make a lot of sense, especially for consumers of kubeadm who do partial implementations using whatever other auxiliary tooling.
Yeah. I wrote up a doc.
Your old doc, or
Yeah,
you
the in the end of 2017.
Yep.
Should we use that as a like text version of the goals we want for GA, and then for each subsection of that text, create an GitHub issue if it doesn't already exist, and reference from our doc, which could be a living doc. Here is the action item for this piece of work that is needed for GA, and then all these issues we create in GitHub is or are marked with the GA label.
Yeah, we just basically need to update a refresh a list.
Yeah.
That we think is the list we want to go forwards with to get to GA. That's all. So maybe
Cool.
maybe by next meeting we can work on the doc together and get that sorted out.
Sounds cool. Update. Create issues for all subsections in GitHub. Okay, host etcd RPMs debs in Kubernetes repo. Who's that?
That was me. I remember this little issue. No, we talked about this in Copenhagen last week. I think it was you mentioning that actually the work group is basically responsible for maintaining the Kubernetes RPMs, which are kept in the VM repo at Google. And I just recently stumbled across the situation of the new minimal version of etcd, which was required by the latest release of kubeadm. And for that version, there are no RPMs on my particular Red Hat Enterprise Linux derivative. It is actually an Oracle Linux. I found the needed version on CentOS repos, which are normally a bit ahead because they have this open source input in there. I would actually assume, I'm not quite sure, that Red Hat Enterprise Linux doesn't have that version either. So if we are recommending to use an external etcd for the HA deployments via kubeadm, then it would actually be a good thing to provide at least one version which meets the required minimal version, so that people don't have to pull a lot of different repos which might not even really fit to what they're using.
So Chuck has an updated doc from the original etcd deployment for external etcd, which uses the kubeadm phases subcommand that to basically stand up a cluster using the containers. Similar to just a self-hosted etcd, not self-hosted, but like static manifest hosted. So that way, instead of you having to manage RPMs and deb packages separately, you can still have the standard artifacts that are being published, It's just that we're using the phases subcommand to lay down the containers and get all the certs and secrets and everything.
So you're thinking of designating a number of nodes for hosting etcd, tainting them in some way that no
Nope.
other workload is put on them, or
They're just static manifests for kubelets. So kubelets are basically running almost as like systemd to simply host etcd itself. And that way we use all our existing artifacts without us having to depend upon other packages.
But I mean, we had this discussion before. I think it was Jamie mentioning that the CoreOS folks really recommend using an external etcd so that the load on the etcd can be actually separated from the load on the Kubernetes cluster.
That is what we're doing. Chuck, if you have a link, you could post in there for folks to read.
Yeah, so one way to think about it is that it is external etcd, except it's using the kubelet to run the etcd process instead of something like systemd.
So that means that you would have to set up a kubelet on all those nodes for the etcd and
Yes.
get it running there. What if you want to run etcd on your master nodes, if you have several?
Yep, the document does not cover that at this time.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're running kubelet on all nodes, both master and normal nodes. But I mean, I see your point. We could always, we have a couple of options. We could say always, the only recommended way to run etcd from SIG cluster lifecycles perspective is by Dockerized images. That is one. Two, we could add debs and RPMs with the versions we know are okay. The etcd versions that are validated from a Kubernetes perspective. Or three, we could just document, here is how you curl down etcd, the binary, and here's the systemd manifest to use.
I don't want to get into the business of trying to support the multiple incantations for distros. We already have the basic stuff in place, the minimal, but the MVP of, container images are better. I agree. I'll just leave it at that. It's a lot easier for us to manage because we already have the build apparatus and artifacts in place for everything else. So we're just using the infrastructure we've created to stand up an external etcd.
So how would that be automated then? Would it be supported directly by kubeadm, or how does it work?
So you can basically drop a static pod manifest file in etc Kubernetes manifests, and the kubelet will run it. And kubeadm has already, like, exposed by the phases command. There is a kubeadm phase etcd local or something that drops this from the configuration you give it to kubeadm, drops the etcd manifest there. So as Chuck has this PR that I just reviewed, with all the steps to generate certificates, how to write the kubeadm's configuration, and then what kubeadm commands to run in order for everything to work smoothly without touching debs and RPMs. Because as Tim said, that's the only reason we have debs and RPMs for our kubeadm deployment is basically to ship the kubelet and provide a semi user-friendly way or user normal way of installing things. But it's basically, you could as well just call down the binaries.
Yes, I totally agree that RPMs are awkward. We don't want that. But anyway, I mean, if we find some way to run it in a containerized way, it should be consistent with the rest. So if I can use kubeadm to set up etcd wherever I like, and then run the other phases to actually set up the cluster, that's cool for me. But in any case, we should be able to run etcd on the master host as well. Then, I mean, that should not get into the way, I would say. Otherwise, it would really get complicated again, because you'd have to treat it as a special case.
I don't think there's anything preventing you from executing Chuck's phases. You'd have to validate it. I don't think there's anything that prevents you from executing the phases on the individual masters, but we need to validate that piece of the puzzle.
I think
Part of,
yes, that makes sense.
yeah, because everything we've said about HA configuration is that your etcd, we've made the hard constraint of saying your etcd should be external, right? And we've said that in almost all documentation. So if people want to go outside of that, we'd have to change some of the workflow items, and we've never. I think we're safe right now, but I do think we should deal with the scenario in the future.
Mhm.
That's
I think
what
it would-
the scenario of. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think it would be, there would be a lot of things that we could do to make the workflow easier if etcd were hosted on the master nodes as well, because they would be part of the cluster and have access to things like secrets. And the certs getting swizzled around wouldn't be such a complicated issue anymore.
Yep. At the moment, the process is of course pretty manual. I mean, all the stuff that we documented for the HA setup, it is awkward, of course. So in the moment we can automate that using kubeadm, it would be great.
We've got one step forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think let's keep it for now that we validate Chuck's PR against standalone cases, like you only run the kubelet as your systemd thing on a master or on a machine that doesn't have the API server running, and so it's really external. And then in the end, nothing prevents you from having that machine the exact same as where you're running kube API server, because it's just an IP you could refer to yourself as well. But having that completely tested, then you can co-locate them if you want, still using the exact same. And then in the grand future, we might explore other things with, as Chuck said, like making it smoother if you have access to things like local certs on disk if you're co-locating. But for now, I think the SIG's official recommendation is use containerized images. I mean, containers is why we're all here, kind of. And then you go with external etcd for now.
Looks very good.
Cool. Then I'm bringing a kubeDNS core DNS issue up. We touched on last KubeCon, and it's also been discussed in various GitHub issues. So the problem is systemd, some systemd systems use systemd network D, or sorry, maybe it was resolve D. I have to check that up. Anyway, that is
resolve D.
It's resolve D. Yeah. That is basically in etc resolve conf. There's only a pointer to 227.0053, and the kubelet doesn't know at all how to handle that case with regards to kubeDNS and core DNS. So if you run, like, and this is, for example, the case for all, that is the case for by default on Ubuntu, for example, and which is kind of bad that most Ubuntu installations have broken DNS. And
1804.
So
it's
yeah.
common in 1804.
Well, it's also 17 as well.
Yeah, 17. Yeah. So we have to find a way to execute on that before we can recommend 18 and 17. Right now we do 16.
So from my understanding on the issue, there seems to be two current kind of workarounds to the problem. One is to modify the systemd drop-in file that is owned by the kubelet packaging that we don't currently touch in kubeadm. And the other way is to modify a config map for either kubeDNS or core DNS when we do the DNS add-on configuration. And that brings up kind of a bigger thing that I've been wondering about, because there are other situations where it seems like it would be helpful if we were allowed to modify settings that feed into the systemd drop-in file that currently trip up users. Because this isn't going to be the first, or this isn't the first, and this won't be the last issue that we hit that relates to kubelet configuration that we're currently kind of pushing off to the user to kind of solve for themselves in a case where we could potentially help them out.
There's no reason we can't, as part of the package installation, have a override for systemd resolution, or some mucking as part of the package itself. So initial kubelet laydown, it tries to do the right thing.
So I think the problem is that limits it to just install, what's available at install time, and not necessarily what's available at cluster configuration time.
We could do a pre-flight check though too. There could be.
Yeah.
I think we definitely need a pre-flight check for this to at least error early if we detect it.
Yeah, that would be the bare minimum that we can do, but it seems like this is the right opportunity to bring up the bigger discussion around, do we potentially want to kind of rework the way that we're handling the systemd drop-in to enable not necessarily modifying the drop-in itself, but be able to modify environment variables into it.
So, yeah, thanks. So this is kind of fun because we really do need to modify the kubelet configuration soon, and that's one of the blockers for us to go GA is a feature called dynamic kubelet configuration. Right now we depend everything, like we depend on the, oh wait, actually we could start moving right now as well. Oh, anyway, the kubelet dynamic configuration stuff is you write an initial file to disk with a beta spec of the kubelet config. The kubelet picks that up, and then as you manage your cluster, the kubelet looks for a specific config map. You create a binding between the node and the config map in the node API object. And as this config map is updated, the kubelet configuration is updated. So you can...
There's still items that aren't covered by either the static kubelet config, which we could move to right now, or even the dynamic kubelet config. I think the resolve might be some that could be handled through the dynamic kubelet config, but things like CRI runtime or other flags like that are things that, or even the what's the other one? The C group configuration for the kubelet. Those are things that need to be set, as command line flags and aren't exposed through the config.
Sure, but that's problem conflation. This particular problem could be resolved via that way. The other stuff already is hard-coded, at least from the drop file for kubeadm for the kubelet. But I think that's like the bootstrapping. We have the initial bootstrap configuration from the deb or RPM installation, and then from there, dynamic kubelet configuration takes over for all the rest of the knobs.
So, yeah, currently the really weird problem we have when hard coding flags in drop-in is upgrades. And you have to do a dance around upgrading the right things in the right order, otherwise things will break. That's why we want to control the kubelet flags from the kubeadm point of view, so we can recommend a set of flags for 110, for example, for the kubelet to use without touching the drop-in. Right now, touching the drop-in is really hard. As we've said, we shouldn't, the kubeadm, the CLI, should never touch the systemd, like go and like start setting the systemd files. but we still want to control the kubelet, but we can't. So with this, as I now remembered, we could actually start writing this file without kubelet dynamic configurations. We could start writing this YAML file with the desired spec and update our systemd drop-in to read this file, because the kubelet component configuration actually graduated to be the last cycle. So we could start this transition now, and as we go, we could then have the fancy add-ons of automatically rebooting the configuration and modifying it at runtime in your cluster, which is still alpha, the dynamic thing. But the read config from file feature is now beta in the kubelet, which is great. So we can stop using the command line flags.
Well, for a subset of the command line flags. Like, like the CRI runtime and cgroups config and things like that are still only.
Yeah, and then you're still free to do the systemd drop-in.
To expand,
we can't really.
I think we only have this limitation with our Ubuntu packaging, because I think the RPM packaging actually configures a systemd environment file that you can modify some of the settings with.
You can pretty easily do with the Ubuntu ones as well. We have documentation on how to create a 20 whatever conf that sets sets the environment variables on
the downside to that, though, is that you're managing a drop-in file instead of just reading in an environment file.
We could always. I mean, if we strongly think an environment file would be better, I'm happy to do that and update our docs.
It sounds like there's a couple paths forwards. I'm not feeling strongly one way or the other at this point, other than we need a fix. And ideally, that's the only major breaking issue that I see with core DNS that I'm aware of.
So it's not a breaking issue with core DNS, though. The issue is with both kubedns and core DNS.
Yeah,
it exists for both of them.
Both are broken.
With DNS.
yeah. We have a slight hope core DNS folks could fix it. There's an issue for that is referenced from the issue I linked, I think.
Yeah, but I'm not too hopeful for that, because I just got finished reading through that entire thread, and basically they would have to write some custom jiggery to be able to track requests through kind of the entire clustered system to be able to detect loops, and there really isn't a standard way to kind of do that right now. So
okay, so what's the thing we could do in the cluster config map?
So I think the immediate thing that we can do right now, I think the first thing that we should do, and I can roll this into the core DNS changes that I have right now, is just add a pre-flight check to detect the situation and tell somebody.
That's really good. The second step is, you said this issue could be mitigated by specifying some kind of weird parameter to core DNS.
Yeah, that would be you can modify the config maps, but we would have to modify the config maps correctly for both kubedns and core DNS when we create them.
I think that's way easier than jiggering with all the kubelets.
But that doesn't necessarily ensure that things, that just ensures that, that subset of the DNS resolution will work. If the kubelet does anything else outside of that, then that's not guaranteed. That you could still potentially have issues with the resolver.
Okay. Either way, I think we're positive on switching to core DNS by default. I mean, both kubedns, for this particular issue, both core DNS and kubedns are affected. And if we have hope for something, it is for core DNS to have this fixed, right?
the other thing too is because this is kind of OS configuration specific, that would have us getting into kind of detecting kind of by OS and writing out that config map for core DNS or kubeDNS based on what OS we're running on. And it seems better to just kind of pre-flight check it and document it for that case until we have a better way to handle kind of it more generically, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying really hard to not do anything OS specific. Always trying to push.
I mean,
for not doing
thinking
such,
about it
but
more
yeah,
because this is limited right now to only versions of OSs that are running systemd, resolved, we can maybe handling it in the packaging and just laying down a sensible default there is the best path forward. Wherever that's the default, kind of lay it as the default and then pre-flight check to verify that it's what we expect and, kind of give users guidance on how they could resolve it if they're kind of going against the grain.
okay. I really need to read on what options to pass to core DNS to maybe fix this. And we'll try to execute on the generic get back control over the config via the kubelet, I think, now that the component configuration is beta. And then we'll switch the core DNS by default, as discussed, as it's going GA, and it's better than kubeDNS by nearly all means. Is that a okay recap? And we'll do the pre-flight check, of course.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. I'll write that down. Config. Okay. Do you have anything else to discuss in these 5 minutes? Or do we get 5 minutes back in our day? I see thumbs up. Cool. Thanks everyone for attending, and see you all next week.